The 5:15 a.m. alarm didn't wake Brenda Owens. She was already staring at the ceiling, mentally cataloging the day's fires before they had even been lit. At 55, Brenda's face was a masterpiece of controlled grace. Deep cocoa skin, eyes that missed nothing, and a mouth that had forgotten how to tremble. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Not a good morning text, a demand. Brenda, the bank called. If I don't have the 4,000 by noon, they're starting the foreclosure. I'm sorry, sis. You're the only one who can swing this. Brenda sighed, a sound that started in her soul and died in her throat. She didn't reply. She simply opened her banking app, authenticated her thumbprint, and moved the money. She didn't resent her brother, but she felt the phantom weight of his house, his children, and his failures settling onto her shoulders, joining the dozen other burdens she carried. As she stood up, a sharp, white-hot spike of pain shot through her left temple, a tension migraine that had been brewing for 3 days. She didn't wince. She simply walked to the bathroom, swallowed 3 extra-strength aspirins with lukewarm tap water, and began the ritual of the armor. She applied her makeup with surgical precision. She stepped into a navy blue power suit that cost more than her brother's mortgage payment. By 7:45 a.m., she was in the back of a car, her laptop open, resolving a logistics nightmare for a shipping conglomerate that had seen 3 male VPs resign in tears the week prior. Tell the union reps I'll be there at 8, Brenda said into her Bluetooth, her voice like velvet wrapped around a blade, and tell the CEO to stop CCing me on his apologies. I don't want his sorry. I want the manifest corrected. She hung up, rubbed the bridge of her nose, and felt the migraine throb in time with her heart. By 9 a.m., the strike was averted. By 10:30 a.m., she had fired a corrupt CFO and reorganized a legal department. She was a fixer, a pillar, the strong Black woman everyone turned to when the world was ending. The rain began at noon, a relentless, gray New York deluge. Brenda was driving herself to a private airfield for a weekend consultation when the sharp thud-thud-thud of a blown tire vibrated through the steering wheel of her Mercedes. She pulled onto the narrow, muddy shoulder of the FDR drive. The rain lashed against the windshield. She looked at her watch. She looked at her ruined silk blouse. She didn't call AAA. She knew the wait would be 2 hours, and the world didn't give Brenda Owens 2 hours of downtime. She stepped out into the freezing downpour. Within seconds, her hair was soaked, her expensive suit heavy with gray water. She opened the trunk, hauled out the spare, and knelt in the mud. The jack was heavy, the lug nuts were rusted tight, and the wind whipped the rain into her eyes until they burned. She strained, her muscles screaming, her hands slick with grease and grit. She didn't curse. She didn't cry. She just pushed until the metal groaned and gave way. She finished the job in 20 minutes. When she climbed back into the driver's seat, she was shivering violently. Mud was smeared across her cheekbone. Her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't fit the key into the ignition. She stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. A woman who was the foundation for everyone else's life, crumbling in the dark. The silence in the car was deafening. The only sound was the rain drumming on the roof, a rhythmic reminder of everything she had to do, everyone she had to save, every bill she had to pay. Her breath hitched. A single jagged sob escaped her, and she pressed her forehead against the cold leather of the steering wheel. God, she whispered, her voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. Who holds me? She waited for an answer. Only the wind replied. 3 hours later, cleaned up but hollowed out, Brenda sat in the terminal's private lounge. Her phone chimed. It wasn't her brother or a panicked CEO. It was a formal encrypted invite from a legal firm in Seoul. Subject, urgent recovery consultation, Hanguang Tech. The message was brief, but the numbers were staggering. Hanguang Tech, the crown jewel of Korean electronics, was facing a hostile takeover and internal sabotage. The chairman, Kang Junyoung, had personally requested the fixer. Brenda looked at the flight details. A first-class suite to Seoul. A car waiting at Incheon. She should have been tired. She should have said no. But Brenda Owens only knew how to move forward. She picked up her bag, straightened her spine, and put the mask back on. She didn't know that 10,000 miles away, a man named Junyoung was staring at her file. Not her resume, but a candid photo of her leaving a courthouse, looking powerful. The flight from New York to Incheon had been 14 hours of pressurized silence, but Brenda hadn't used a second of it to sleep. While the other first-class passengers tucked themselves under duvets, Brenda had been bathed in the blue light of her laptop, dissecting the hemorrhaging bank accounts of Hangguang Tech. When she stepped off the plane, the Seoul humidity hit her like a physical wall, but she didn't wilt. She stopped in the terminal restroom, reapplied a layer of mahogany lipstick, and adjusted the lapels of her cream-colored blazer. She looked like a woman who had just stepped out of a spa, not a woman who felt like her bones were made of dry glass. The Hangguang headquarters was a monolith of obsidian glass and cold steel that pierced the Seoul skyline. Inside, the air was filtered, sterile, and smelled of expensive paper and repressed anxiety. "Chairman Kang will see you now," a young assistant said, bowing low. Brenda followed, her heels clicking a rhythmic predatory staccato against the marble. She was used to the stairs. She was a 6-foot-tall black woman in a space that rarely saw anyone who looked like her, let alone someone brought in to tell the elite how to do their jobs. She wore their scrutiny like a second skin. The chairman's office was vast. Kang Junyoung stood by the window, his back to the door. At 52, he possessed the kind of gravity that pulled the oxygen out of a room. When he turned, he didn't offer a smile. He didn't offer a hand. He simply looked at her. He had expected a shark, a loud, aggressive American consultant who would bluster into his boardroom. Instead, he saw a woman whose elegance was so sharp it was almost painful. But as a man who lived his life behind a mask of his own, he saw the truth. The slight, nearly imperceptible puffiness beneath her eyes, and the way her shoulders were set in a permanent defensive brace. She is exhausted, he thought. A strange, unwelcome pang of recognition tightening his chest. She is holding herself together by sheer force of will. "Ms. Owens," he said, his English flawless and deep. "I'm told you specialize in the impossible." "I specialize in the truth, Chairman," Brenda replied, her voice steady. "The impossible usually just requires someone with the nerve to cut away the rot." The board meeting lasted 4 hours. It was a bloodbath. 7 senior executives sat across from Brenda, their faces twisted in varying degrees of condescension and fear. They spoke in rapid-fire Korean, assuming she wouldn't catch the nuances of their disdain. Brenda sat at the center of the long mahogany table, a lone island of composure. She presented her restructuring plan with a surgical precision that left them no room to argue. Junyoung sat at the head of the table, ostensibly watching the complex financial projections flickering on the screen, but his gaze kept drifting. He wasn't looking at the data. He was looking at Brenda's hands. Above the table, she was the picture of Executive Grace. Flipping through pages, gesturing with a gold pen, her voice a calm, commanding alto. But beneath the table, out of everyone else's sight, her left hand was gripped so tightly around the velvet fabric of her chair that her knuckles were ghost white. Her fingers were trembling, a minute, frantic vibration of a body pushed far past its limit, yet she refused to let it travel up her arm. He knew that grip. He had felt it in his own hands during the years he spent building an empire while his personal life turned to ash. He recognized the bone-deep loneliness of being the only person in the room who wasn't allowed to fail. A senior director began to bark a challenge, his voice rising in an attempt to intimidate her. Brenda didn't blink. She waited for him to finish, her face a mask of granite. "Director Choi," she said softly, If you spent as much energy on your logistics oversight as you do on your tone, we wouldn't be in this room. Sit down." The room went silent. Junyoung felt a slow, heavy pulse in his veins. He didn't see a consultant. He saw a mirror. When the meeting finally adjourned, the director scrambled out, eager to escape Brenda's gaze. She remained in her seat for a moment, her eyes fixed on her laptop. Junyoung didn't leave. He stood at the head of the table, watching the way her posture finally, almost imperceptibly, sagged as the door clicked shut. "You handled them well," he said. Brenda didn't look up. She was busy closing tabs, her fingers still stiff. "I've dealt with men like them my entire career, Chairman. They aren't unique." "No," Junyoung said, stepping closer, "but the price you pay for handling them is." Brenda's fingers paused on the keyboard. She looked up, her guard snapping back into place, but for a split second, Junyoung saw it. The flash of raw, naked weariness in her dark eyes. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "I mean, Ms. Owens, that you are holding the edge of that chair as if you will fall off the earth if you let go." Brenda looked down at her hand, realized she was still gripping the seat, and slowly, painfully, forced her fingers to uncurl. She tucked them into her lap, her face hardening. "I am here to save your company, not to be analyzed." "Perhaps," Junyoung said, his voice dropping to a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in the space between them. "But I have found that at the top of the mountain the air is very thin. It is hard to breathe alone, is it not?" Brenda stared at him. For the first time in a decade, someone had looked past the strong black woman, past the fixer, and seen the person drowning in the deep end. She felt a terrifying urge to exhale, to really exhale, but she didn't know how. "I'm fine, Chairman," she said, her voice like cracking ice. "I know you are," he replied, his eyes locked onto hers with a devastating empathy. "That is the problem." The digital clock on the obsidian wall of the executive suite clicked to 2:14 a.m. The 48th floor of the Hanguang Tower felt less like an office and more like a ghost ship drifting through the neon fog of Seoul. Brenda sat at the center of a sea of paper. Her eyes, usually as sharp as flint, were bloodshot, tracing the jagged lines of a tax indemnity clause that had been hidden like a landmine by the company's rivals. She had been at this for 18 hours straight. Her back was a column of fire, and the migraine from 3 days ago had settled into a dull, rhythmic thudding behind her left ear. She looked at the door. The floor was dark. The cleaning crews had long since finished. The security guards were downstairs, watching monitors she wasn't on. For the first time since she had landed in Korea, Brenda let the strong black woman die. She reached up, her fingers trembling slightly, and unpinned the custom-made wig that had sat perfectly on her head all day. She pulled it off, revealing her natural hair, silver flecked at the temples. The relief of the air hitting her scalp was so intense, it made her lightheaded. Next came the shoes. She kicked off the 5-inch designer heels, her swollen feet hitting the cold carpet with a muffled thud. She let her toes curl and uncurl, a small moan of agony and relief escaping her throat. She leaned back in the $10,000 leather chair, her head lolling back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She didn't look like a high-level executive anymore. She looked like a survivor of a shipwreck who had finally reached the sand. She rubbed her temples, her thumbs pressing hard into the bone. Then it happened. A sound she never allowed anyone to hear. She let out a breath, not a sigh, but a jagged, broken exhale that sounded like a sob that hadn't quite made it to her eyes. "God," she whispered to the empty room, "I'm so tired. I'm just so damn tired." The click of the door handle was nearly silent, but in the vacuum of the night, it sounded like a gunshot. Brenda bolted upright, her hand instinctively reaching for the wig on the desk, her face snapping back into a mask of professional alertness. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was exposed. She was untidy. She was human. Junyoung stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked like they were carved from cedar. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't even look at the wig sitting like a discarded helmet on the mahogany table. Brenda froze, her hand hovering over her hair. Chairman, I thought everyone had gone. I was just finishing the indemnity draft. She waited for the judgment. She waited for him to make a comment about her appearance or ask why she wasn't put together. Junyoung didn't speak. He walked into the room with a slow, deliberate grace. He didn't look at the documents. He didn't look at her face. He kept his eyes lowered, a gesture of profound respect for her privacy, even as he invaded it. He reached the desk and placed two things down. The first was a glass bottle of premium mineral water, the seal already cracked so she wouldn't have to strain her hands to open it. The second was a pair of plush, oversized white hotel slippers, pulled from the wrapping and placed side by side on the floor next to her bare, aching feet. Brenda stared at the slippers. Her throat tightened so quickly it hurt. Junyoung finally looked at her. He didn't offer a, "You look tired," or a, "Do you need help?" questions that would have forced her to lie and say she was fine. Instead, he met her gaze with a look of such heavy, quiet understanding that it felt like he had reached out and touched her soul. "The loophole is closed," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to soothe the thudding in her head. "I have read the digital draft you uploaded 10 minutes ago. It is perfect." "I have more to do," Brenda said, her voice sounding small even to her own ears. "The board meeting is at 8. Junyoung looked at the slippers again, then back to her. "The board can wait," he said. "The world can wait. For the next 5 hours, Ms. Owens. No one needs you to be a pillar." He didn't wait for a thank you. He didn't try to linger or turn it into a moment. He simply turned and walked toward the door. "Drink the water," he said over his shoulder, "and put on the slippers. They are softer than the floor." He closed the door behind him with a soft click. Brenda sat in the silence, staring at the white slippers. She reached out, her fingers brushing the soft fabric. A single tear, hot and heavy, finally escaped and hit the mahogany desk. She didn't put the wig back on. She didn't put the heels back on. She slid her feet into the slippers, opened the water, and for the first time in a decade, she let herself lean back and just breathe. Brenda woke up with the slippers still on her feet, but her armor was already back on before her eyes fully opened. The moment of vulnerability in the dark was a debt she intended to repay with double the efficiency today. By 10 a.m., she was in the lobby of the Four Seasons Seoul, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, clutching a list of personal errands she needed to squeeze into her lunch hour, refilling her migraine prescription, finding a specific brand of ginger tea, and mailing a package of Korean skincare to her daughter. "Ms. Owens," the concierge said, bowing smoothly as she approached, "Chairman Kang has arranged for a car and a personal assistant to accompany you for the day. They are waiting at the curb." Brenda stopped dead. Her jaw tightened. "I didn't request a car." The chairman insisted. "He noted you had several personal stops to make." Brenda felt a flare of something hot and defensive in her chest. It wasn't gratitude. It was a territorial alarm. "Cancel it," she said. Her voice clipped. "I'll use the subway or hail a taxi. I pay my own way." "But, Ms. Owens—" "Cancel it," she repeated, turning on her heel and walking toward the glass doors. As she stepped into the bustling Seoul Street, the ghost of a memory trailed her like a shadow. Atlanta, 15 years ago. She could still see Andre's face, the man she had once thought was her partner. He drained her until there was nothing left. He had been charming, handsome, and utterly hollow. Brenda had spent 10 years being his rock. She had paid for his failed business ventures. She had paid the lawyer when he got into trouble. And she had even paid for the engagement ring he eventually gave her. She remembered the night she finally broke. She had come home from a 12-hour shift at the firm, exhausted to her marrow, only to find him sitting on the sofa, asking if she'd picked up his dry cleaning. "You're so strong, baby," he'd said, as if that was a magical spell that made her fatigue disappear. "You can handle anything. That's why I love you." To Andre, her strength wasn't a trait, it was a utility. Her independence had been a cage that allowed everyone around her to be lazy. She had learned the hard way. If you let a man provide the car, eventually he'll expect you to build the road, pave the street, and pay for the gas. Needing someone was a weakness. Vulnerability was a trap. She marched into the Hanguang Tower an hour later, bypassing the secretaries and heading straight for Junyoung's private office. She didn't knock. Junyoung was standing at a small table pouring tea. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I don't need a driver, Chairman," she said, the words vibrating with a decade of repressed resentment. "I don't need an assistant. I've been taking care of myself since I was 19 years old. When you offer help like that, it feels like an assessment of my incompetence." Junyoung set the teapot down. He didn't look at her with the patronizing, calm down expression she expected. He looked at her with the profound, quiet weariness that matched her own. "Is that what you think?" he asked softly. "That I think you are incapable of hailing a taxi?" "Then why do it?" she challenged. "I told you I handle my own life. I pay my own way. I don't want to be a line item in your budget, Junyoung." He took a step toward her. He didn't stop until he was within her personal space, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of sandalwood and expensive ink. "You think this is about your strength," he said, his voice dropping to a low, resonant frequency. "You think I am trying to take your power. You are wrong." He looked out the window at the sprawling, glittering city of Seoul, an empire he ruled, but one that offered him no warmth. "Do you know what it is like, Brenda? To be the chairman? Every person who walks through that door wants something. They want a contract. They want a favor. They want a piece of the billionaire. They want a piece of the CEO." He turned back to her, and for the first time, the stone-cold mask of the Kang legacy was gone. His eyes were raw. "No one wants the man," he whispered. "No one wants to give. Everyone only wants to take. I didn't send that car because I thought you were weak. I sent it because, for once in my life, I wanted to be the person who gives, to the only person I've met who doesn't know how to ask." Brenda's breath hitched in her throat. The strong black woman defense she had built around her heart began to crack. "I am lonely, Brenda," he admitted, the confession hanging in the air like a physical weight. "And I see you. You are the most competent person in this building, and you are also the loneliest. I wasn't trying to buy you. I was trying to reach you." Brenda looked away, her eyes stinging. The villain wasn't Junyoung. The villain was the decades of being told she had to be a pillar until she forgot how to be a person. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to let someone in without losing myself." "Then don't let me in yet," Junyoung said, reaching out but stopping his hand just inches from hers, giving her the choice. "Just let the driver take you to the pharmacy. Start with the small things. Let me hold the door so you can have your hands free to hold yourself." Brenda looked at his hand, then at his face. For the first time in 15 years, the independence trap felt like it might finally have a key. The air in the temporary office Brenda occupied at Hanguang Tech was thick with the ozone of high-end electronics and the frantic, tinny sound of a voice coming through her smartphone. "Mom, they're saying it's my fault. The police are here, and the other driver is screaming, and I don't know what to do." Her daughter's voice, cracked with panic, traveled 4,000 miles across the Pacific, landing in Brenda's ear like lead. Brenda's eyes didn't leave her dual monitors. On the left, a Zoom call with 3 attorneys in New York was on mute. On the right, a spreadsheet of Hanguang's intellectual property assets blinked in a sea of red. "Maya, breathe," Brenda said, her voice a low mechanical hum. She was typing with one hand, her knuckles white. "Don't admit fault. Give the officer your insurance. I'm already looking at the Georgia traffic statutes. I'll call a local attorney in 5 minutes. Just stay on the line. Her head was spinning. A 3-day migraine had finally matured into a blinding light behind her eyes. Her leg was bouncing under the desk, a nervous tic she only allowed when she was alone. She was vibrating with the sheer effort of keeping two worlds from colliding. She was the fixer. She was the one who kept Maya out of trouble, the one who kept her brother's lights on, and the one currently preventing a hostile takeover of a Korean dynasty. The door to her office opened. She didn't look up. I'm in the middle of a crisis, Junyoung. I can't do the 4 p.m. brief. I am aware, a deep, calm voice replied. Brenda didn't see him move, but suddenly a shadow fell across her desk. A large, warm hand reached out, not tentatively, but with the absolute authority of a man who owned everything he touched, and gently but firmly closed the lid of her laptop. Hey, Brenda gasped, her eyes finally snapping up to his. I'm on a call with... He didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on her phone, which was still emitting Maya's panicked whimpers. Junyoung reached down and took the device right out of Brenda's hand. For a second, Brenda's brain short-circuited. No one took anything from Brenda Owens. She was the one who distributed tasks. She was the one who held the keys. The loss of the phone felt like a loss of oxygen. She stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. Junyoung, give me my phone. My daughter... Junyoung didn't even look at the screen. He turned to the man standing in the doorway, his personal chief of staff, a man known in the Seoul underworld and corporate circles alike as the Ghost, because he made problems vanish. Mr. Han, Junyoung said, his voice a cool, rhythmic baritone. Miss Owens' daughter has been in a motor vehicle accident in Atlanta. Contact our U.S. legal team. Have a private investigator on site within 20 minutes to handle the police report. Ensure the daughter is moved to a private clinic for a full evaluation. Secure the other driver's information and settle it. Mr. Han bowed, took the phone from Junyoung's hand, and disappeared into the hallway without a word. What are you doing? Brenda whispered, her voice trembling. You can't just... That's my life. That's my daughter. I handle this. I always handle this. Junyoung stepped closer, cutting off her path to the door. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical barrier, a mountain of tailored wool and unshakable intent. It is handled, he said. Mr. Han has more resources in his left pocket than the attorney you were about to call has in his entire firm. Your daughter is safe. The crisis is over. I have to check the merger files, she said, her voice rising in a frantic, habitual defensive crouch. The IP assets. I have shifted the deadline, Junyoung interrupted. I am the chairman. I decided that the assets are not as important as the woman tasked with saving them. He pointed to the heavy leather armchair in the corner of the room. Sit. Junyoung. Sit, Brenda. It wasn't a shout. It was a command wrapped in silk. Brenda's legs, which had been holding her upright through pure muscle memory, finally gave way. She sank into the chair. The silence that followed was terrifying. For the first time in 30 years, she didn't have a phone in her hand. She didn't have a spreadsheet in front of her. She didn't have a fire to put out. She felt a strange, cold sensation in her chest. It was the absence of a burden. It was the terrifying, beautiful weightlessness of being useless. Junyoung walked to the small sideboard, poured a glass of amber liquid, and knelt. Not sat, but knelt, beside her chair, so he was looking up at her. He placed the glass in her shaking hands. Look at me, he commanded softly. Brenda looked. His eyes weren't the eyes of a CEO looking at a consultant. They were the eyes of a man who had watched a soldier carry a rucksack until her spine began to crack. For your entire life, Junyoung said, you have been the one who is strong. You have been the ceiling for your family and the floor for your clients. But today, the ceiling is mine. The floor is mine. He reached out, and this time he did touch her. He laid a hand over her trembling ones, still holding the glass. You are not the fixer today, Brenda. You are simply a woman whose daughter is being cared for by a man who has the power to do so. Let the world break for an hour. I promise you, I will not let it touch you. Brenda stared at him, and finally, the vibration stopped. The strong black woman didn't just step down, she collapsed. Brenda leaned her head back against the chair, a ragged, shuddering breath escaping her, and for the first time in her life, she let someone else be the most powerful person in the room. The silence wasn't a prison, it was a sanctuary. The high-rise glass of the Hanguang Tower had been replaced by the flickering neon and orange plastic of a Pojangmacha, a street-side tent tucked into a quiet alleyway in Yongno. Brenda felt physically exposed. She wasn't wearing the navy power suit or the wig. She wore a soft, oversized cream cashmere sweater and a pair of dark jeans she'd bought at a boutique in Myeongdong because she couldn't face her dry cleaner-bound wardrobe. Her natural hair of soft curls felt light on her head, but heavy on her conscience. Junyoung sat across from her on a low plastic stool that looked entirely too small for his frame. He had shed his tie and blazer. His white sleeves were rolled up, revealing the strong, corded muscles of his forearms as he expertly deshelled a spicy shrimp for her. You should eat, he said, placing the shrimp on her small paper plate. The merger is 70% drafted. The crisis in Atlanta is resolved. The world is spinning without your hands on the wheel, Brenda. Brenda looked at the shrimp, then at him. There were no cameras here, no board members, just the sound of the rain hitting the orange tarp and the hiss of the grill. For the first time, she saw the fine lines around his eyes. Lines that spoke of laughter he didn't use enough and burdens he carried just as long as she had. She took a bite, the spice hitting her tongue, and for a second, she felt it. A terrifying, liquid warmth in her chest. She felt soft. She hated it. The softness felt like an invitation for a knife. If she let herself enjoy the way he looked at her, not as a genius consultant, but as a woman whose company he simply enjoyed, she would lose the edge that had kept her alive for 50 years. I'm leaving, Junyoung, she said suddenly. Her voice was too loud for the small tent. Junyoung's hand paused over his glass of soju. He didn't look up immediately. The contract is for another 3 weeks. I'll finish the drafts from New York. I'll zoom into the final board meeting. She began to gather her small leather clutch, her movements frantic and jagged. I've done what I came here to do. Your company is safe. You don't need me anymore. Junyoung set his glass down with a slow, deliberate click. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers, peeling back the layers of her panic until he found the raw nerve underneath. The company is safe, he agreed quietly, but that is not why you are running. I am not running. I'm an executive with a schedule. You are terrified, he interrupted. He reached across the small table. He didn't grab her hand. He simply laid his palm open on the table, an invitation for her to stop. You felt it tonight, didn't you? The moment you realized you weren't thinking about a bill or a crisis or a deadline, you were just here with me. Brenda stood up, the plastic stool scraping harshly against the pavement. I can't be just here, Junyoung. My whole life is built on being over there, fixing things, being the one who anticipates the blow. If I get used to this, to you taking the phone out of my hand, to you deshelling my food, to you watching my back, what happens when I go home? What happens to the pillar when the ground moves? She was shaking now, the strong black woman armor lying in pieces on the dirty floor of a street tent. I don't know how to do this, she whispered, her eyes filling with the heat she had suppressed for decades. I don't know how to be a woman who is taken care of. I don't have a map for that. In my world, if you're not the one carrying the weight, you're the one being crushed by it. Junyoung rose slowly, his presence filling the small space, stepping around the table until he was inches from her. He didn't pull her into a cinematic embrace. He simply stood there, a solid, unmoving sanctuary. Then let me be your map, he said, his voice a low, vibrating chord of certainty. You think being taken care of means losing your power. It doesn't. It means finally having the breath to use it for yourself instead of for everyone else. You've spent 50 years being a floor for people who didn't even say thank you. Why is it so much harder to let me be a ceiling for you? Because if you're the ceiling, Brenda choked out, a single tear finally escaping, and you leave, I'm out in the rain again, and I don't think I can survive the cold a second time. Junyoung reached out, his thumb catching the tear before it could fall. His touch was electric, not because of lust, but because of the sheer terrifying safety of it. Then I will build you a house, he whispered, one with walls so thick the rain will never reach you again. Stay, Brenda, not for Han Guang, for the woman who deserves to finally put her bags down. Brenda looked at him, and for the first time in her life, the fixer realized she was facing a problem she couldn't solve with a spreadsheet or a legal clause. She had to choose the safety of her lonely prison or the danger of his open arms. The atmosphere in the grand boardroom of Han Guang Tech was suffocating. Outside, the Seoul skyline was choked with gray smog. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone, expensive cologne, and the metallic tang of an impending execution. Brenda sat at the long table, her fingers resting on a thin manila folder. Inside that folder was the kill shot. Data proving that Director Choi had been funneling Han Guang's R&D secrets to a competitor in Shanghai. It was enough to end the coup, save Junyoung's chairmanship, and cement her legacy as the greatest fixer in the business. But Brenda was empty. The battle of the previous night, the softness that had cracked her open, had left her raw. Her head throbbed with a rhythmic, punishing heat. The lights in the room felt like needles against her retinas. For the first time in 30 years, the strong black woman felt the weight of her own bones. She felt like a clock that had been wound too tight for too long, and the spring was finally about to snap. The evidence provided by the American consultant is questionable at best, Director Choi sneered, leaning back in his chair. He looked around the table at the other board members, his voice dripping with calculated xenophobia. Chairman Kang has brought a stranger into our house to tell us how to clean it. Perhaps the chairman is no longer fit to lead if he relies so heavily on an outsider who doesn't understand our culture or our loyalty. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Brenda tried to stand. She needed to deliver the presentation. She needed to speak. But as she gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knees felt like water. The room tilted. Not now, she pleaded with her own body. Just 10 more minutes of strength. That's all I need. She started to rise, her voice catching in her throat. If you look at the ledger on page 12. You look tired, Miss Owens, Choi interrupted, his smile sharpening. Perhaps the flight was too long. Perhaps this is too much for you. Suddenly, the heavy leather chair at the head of the table shifted. Junyoung didn't speak. He didn't shout. He rose from his seat with a slow, predatory grace that silenced the room. But he didn't walk to the podium to take the folder from Brenda. He didn't try to be the hero who spoke for her. Instead, he walked the length of the table and stopped directly behind her. Brenda felt the heat of his body before she saw him. He didn't touch her. That would have been a sign of ownership in this den of sharks. Instead, he placed his hands firmly on the back of her chair and stood so close that she could feel the steady, unshakable rhythm of his breathing against her shoulder. He became a wall, a literal, physical backbone. Ms. Owens, Junyoung said, his voice a low, vibrating baritone that cut through Choi's noise like a scythe. The floor is yours. I am right here. The message was clear to everyone in the room. She is the sword, and I am the shield. If you strike at her, you hit me. The support was invisible but absolute. Brenda felt the trembling in her legs subside. She realized she didn't have to hold herself up anymore. He was holding the space for her. She wasn't standing alone in the line of fire. For the first time in her life, she had a rearguard. She inhaled a deep, cleansing breath that tasted of his sandalwood scent, and her voice returned, deeper and steadier than before. As I was saying, Brenda said, her eyes locking onto Choi's with the cold precision of a sniper. Director Choi, if you turn to page 12, you'll see the offshore account linked to your sister-in-law. And on page 13, you'll find the transcript of your 2 a.m. call to Shanghai. She dissected him. She didn't just present evidence. She performed a forensic audit of his betrayal in front of the entire board. With every word, she felt Junyoung's presence behind her, a silent, powerful anchor that allowed her to put all her energy into the attack because she no longer had to spend any energy on staying upright. 10 minutes later, Choi was being escorted out by security. The board sat in stunned, terrified silence. Brenda slowly sat back down. The adrenaline began to ebb, and the exhaustion threatened to rush back in. But before it could drown her, she felt a hand. Warm, heavy, and solid. Briefly squeeze her shoulder. It was a fleeting touch, gone before anyone could gossip, but it felt like a benediction. The meeting adjourned. The room emptied until only the two of them remained in the vast, glass-walled silence. Brenda stared at the empty folder. I almost didn't have it in me today, she whispered. Junyoung moved around the table and sat in the chair next to her. He didn't look at the documents. He looked at her. I know, he said. That is why I stood there. Not because you couldn't do it, but because you shouldn't have to do it alone. Brenda looked at him, her eyes searching his. We're equals in this, aren't we? The burden, I mean. We are, Junyoung replied. But a burden shared is a weight halved. Go to the hotel, Brenda. Sleep. No phones. No crises. I will watch the world until you wake up. For the first time, Brenda didn't argue. She didn't say, I can handle it. She simply nodded, leaned her head back, and for one beautiful, silent moment, she let herself be watched over. The human body is a ledger, and Brenda Owens had been keeping her debts off the books for 30 years. She had traded sleep for success, peace for precision, and her own health for the stability of everyone who leaned on her. On Tuesday morning, the bill finally came due. It started as a shimmer at the edge of her vision, a jagged, oily halo that made the marble floors of the Hanguang executive wing look like deep water. Her skin felt too tight, humming with a fever that wasn't an infection, but an inflammatory response to a life lived at the breaking point. Ms. Owens, an assistant asked, holding out a stack of documents as Brenda moved toward the elevators. The final compliance signatures? On my desk, Brenda said. Her voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. She walked away, her hand trailing along the cool glass of the corridor wall. Just get to the car, she told herself. Just get to the hotel, take 4 aspirins, and handle the 6 p.m. call. You can handle this. You always handle this. But the I can handle it lie, which had been her North Star, finally flickered and went out. The hallway began to tilt. The oxygen in the room turned to lead. She reached for the door handle of a private conference room, but her fingers felt like they belonged to someone else. She heard a sound, the sharp, rhythmic clatter of her own heels slowing down, then stopping. The world didn't go black all at once. It faded into a soft, terrifying gray. Brenda's knees hit the carpet first, then her shoulder clipped the wall. As she slumped into the corner of the empty, quiet corridor, her last thought wasn't about the merger or her daughter. It was, oh God, I'm finally down. Please don't let anyone see me like this. She woke to the scent of cedar and the sound of a crackling fire. It wasn't the sterile, filtered air of her hotel or the metallic tang of a hospital. It was a home. Brenda tried to sit up, but a heavy, warm hand gently pressed against her shoulder, pinning her back into the softness of a 1,000-thread-count duvet. Don't, a voice commanded. It was Junyoung. She blinked, her vision clearing. She wasn't in a ward. She was in a vast, dimly lit master suite. The walls were dark wood, the windows looked out over a private moonlit garden, and the man who ran a global empire was sitting in a chair pulled right up to the side of the bed. He had changed into a charcoal sweater, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burning with a fierce, quiet intensity. Where Brenda's voice was a scratchy ghost of itself. My home, Junyoung said. I found you in the North Corridor. You had a fever of 103 degrees. The doctor said it is systemic exhaustion. The nurse helps with your clothes. Your body has simply decided to stop taking your orders. Brenda felt a surge of panic. The old ingrained reflex of the pillar. The press. The board. If they know the fixer collapsed. No one knows, Junyoung interrupted, his voice like velvet over steel. I carried you to my private lift. My staff is sworn to silence. To the world, you are unavailable for 48 hours. To me, you are a woman who is finally going to sleep. I have to get back, she whispered, struggling against the covers. I can't just stay here. I have bills, Junyoung. I have people who need me to be. Stop. He stood up and sat on the edge of the mattress. The weight of him caused her to roll slightly toward him. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip a silent promise. For once, Brenda, look at the man in front of you, he said. I am not asking for a report. I am not asking for a solution. I am not asking you to be the strongest person in the room. He picked up a cool, damp cloth from a bowl on the nightstand and gently wiped the beads of sweat from her forehead. The intimacy of the gesture, the chairman of Hanguang performing a task so menial, so tender, made Brenda's throat ache. I spent 20 years watching my mother work herself into a grave because she was the strong one for our family, Junyoung said, his voice dropping to a low, pained frequency. I recognize the look in your eyes the day we met. It is the look of a person who thinks that if they stop moving, they will cease to exist. He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. You exist to me even when you are still. You are valuable to me even when you are broken. You are staying here. I will be in the next room. If you need water, I will bring it. If you need silence, I will guard it. But you will not handle anything today. Brenda looked at him, searching for the catch, the demand, the why, the price tag. She found nothing but a vast open sanctuary. For the first time in 50 years, Brenda Owens let go of the edge of the world. She closed her eyes, felt the warmth of his hand on hers, and let herself drift into a sleep that wasn't a temporary truce, but a surrender. She didn't have to be the pillar. The mountain was already there. The light in the room had shifted from the silver of moonlight to the soft, honeyed amber of a soul morning. Brenda stirred, the silk of the duvet whispering against her skin. For a few seconds, she existed in a vacuum of peace. No alarms, no vibrating phones, no mental checklists. Then, memory rushed back like a cold tide. The hallway, the gray fog, the collapse. She bolted upright, or tried to, but her muscles felt like they had been replaced by heavy velvet. A soft groan escaped her. Easy, a voice said. Junyoung was sitting in the same chair as the night before. He had changed into a simple black turtleneck and trousers, a book resting closed on his lap. He looked remarkably rested for a man who had spent the night guarding a ghost. Brenda's hand flew to her head, feeling her wig still on, the vulnerability of her bare skin. She felt a hot, prickly rush of shame crawl up her neck. I am so sorry, Junyoung, she began, her voice cracking. She looked for her bag, her shoes, her armor. I don't know what happened. It was a fluke, a lack of hydration. I should have been more careful. It's completely unprofessional for me to be in your home, taking up your time like this. I can be at the office by 10. I just need to... Brenda, I need to call Maya and check the closing documents for the Shanghai division. I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm not a woman who breaks. I'm the one who fixes. I'm the one who stays up. I'm sorry for being so weak. She was rambling now, the strong black woman persona, trying desperately to stitch itself back together with threads of apology and frantic competence. She began to swing her legs out of the bed, her movements jerky and forced. Junyoung rose from his chair. He didn't stop her by force, but he stood in her path, his presence a calm, immovable mountain. Stop, he said softly. I can't stop, she snapped, her eyes finally meeting his. Bright with tears she refused to let fall. If I stop, everything falls apart. My family, my career, my reputation, they all stay up because I stay up. I can't be weak in front of you, not you. Why not me? Because you're the chairman, she cried out, the frustration finally boiling over. Because you're an equal. I've spent my whole life being the person everyone leans on. If I let you see me like this, collapsed, wigless, shaking, then who am I? I'm just another woman who couldn't handle the heat. Junyoung stepped into her space. He reached out and, with an agonizingly slow tenderness, he took her face in both of his hands. His thumbs traced the high, elegant line of her cheekbones, forcing her to look at him. Is that what you think? He asked, his voice a low, vibrating chord of truth. You think your value is in your lack of a breaking point? You think I admire you because you are a machine? Brenda's breath hitched. She tried to look away, but he held her gaze with a fierce, quiet intensity. Listen to me, he said. You are the strongest person I have ever met. I have seen you handle boardrooms full of vipers and crises that would make most men go to their knees. Your strength is not a question. It is a fact. His hands moved to her shoulders, his grip firm and grounding. But Brenda, even the earth needs to stop shaking eventually, he whispered. The world turns because the ground stays still. You have been the earthquake for everyone else for 50 years. You have moved mountains for people who didn't even notice the effort it took. He leaned in, his forehead almost touching hers, his scent, sandalwood and safety, enveloping her. Let me be the ground you stand on, he said. Let me be the one thing in your life that does not move, does not demand, and does not need you to fix it. You don't have to be the fixer in this house. You just have to be Brenda, and Brenda is enough. The wall inside her didn't just crack, it vanished. Brenda let out a sound, half sob, half sigh. And finally, she stopped fighting. She leaned forward, burying her face in the hollow of his neck, her hands clutching the fabric of his sweater as if she were a drowning woman who had finally found a pier. She wasn't a pillar. She wasn't a floor. She was just a woman, held by a man who was strong enough to carry her weight. For the first time in her life, the silence wasn't a warning of a coming storm. It was the sound of rest. The past rarely knocks politely. It tends to kick the door down just when you finally started to enjoy the quiet. Brenda was standing in the sculpture garden of the Han Guang Museum, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the Han River. She was dressed in a tailored cream suit, her hair styled in a sophisticated flow. She looked every bit the powerhouse executive, but her eyes held a new, softer light. Then she saw him. Andre stood at the entrance of the garden, looking remarkably unchanged. He still wore that charming rogue smile that had cost Brenda 10 years of her youth and hundreds of thousands of dollars in investments that never saw a return. He looked out of place among the minimalist steel sculptures, his jacket a little too tight, his shoes a little too scuffed. Brenda, he said, his voice dripping with that old, familiar honey. I saw the headlines. The American Fixer saves the dragon. I always knew you'd hit the big time, baby. I just didn't think you'd forget the people who were there when you had nothing. Brenda felt the old, cold, familiar weight drop into her stomach. The pillar in her tried to straighten her spine, to prepare for the inevitable request for a bridge loan or an emergency. How did you get here, Andre? She asked, her voice flat. I have my way. I took a leap of faith, just like we used to, he said, walking closer, ignoring the way she stiffened. He looked around at the opulence. I hear the chairman is quite fond of you. Must be nice, trading in the struggle for a silk bed and a billionaire's credit card. But that's not you, Brenda. You're a queen of the streets, not some trophy in a golden cage. You're too strong to let a man buy your soul. It was the ultimate guilt trip, the weaponization of her own strength. He was trying to tell her that accepting Junyoung's care was a betrayal of her identity. I'm not a trophy, Brenda said, her voice trembling slightly. Aren't you? Look at you. You've changed. You look soft, Andre sneered, the word sounding like an insult. I'm struggling, Brenda. The business in Atlanta folded. I need a little seed money to get back on my feet. A drop in the bucket for your new friend. Surely you can handle that for your old partner? Or has he got you on such a tight leash you can't even help a brother out? Brenda opened her mouth to snap back, to handle it, to pay him just to make the shame of his presence go away. But a shadow fell across the stone path. Junyoung stepped out from behind a large bronze monolith. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't shouting. He walked with the terrifying, silent confidence of a man who owned the air Andre was breathing. He didn't look at Andre. He walked straight to Brenda and stood just behind her right shoulder. He didn't take over the conversation. He didn't pull out a checkbook. He simply placed a hand on the small of Brenda's back, a warm, steady anchor. Ms. Owens, Junyoung said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. Is this man bothering you? This is Andre, Brenda said, her heart hammering. He's from my past. Andre squared his shoulders, trying to match Junyoung's height. I'm the man who knows who she really is. I'm the one who was there before the billions. I know she's strong enough to take care of her own. Junyoung finally turned his gaze to Andre. It was like a predator looking at a nuisance. You think her strength is a currency you are entitled to spend? Junyoung said. You think that because she can carry you, she must. I'm not talking to you, Andre spat. Brenda, tell him. Tell him you don't need his protection. Tell him you handle your own business. Brenda felt the pivot point of her life beneath her feet. For years, she would have paid Andre just to prove she didn't need anyone's help to solve a problem. She would have sacrificed her peace to maintain the image of the strong black woman who needed nothing. She looked at Junyoung. He wasn't trying to step in front of her. He was staying behind her, his hand on her back, giving her his strength to use as her own. He wasn't taking her power. He was acting as her battery. Brenda turned back to Andre. Her face was like carved mahogany. You're right, Andre, she said, her voice echoing in the quiet garden. I am strong. I am strong enough to have carried you for a decade. I am strong enough to have built a career out of the ashes you left behind, and I am strong enough to tell you that I am done. Brenda, baby. I'm not your baby. I'm not paying for your flight home. I'm not paying your rent. And I'm certainly not apologizing for being soft, she said, a small, triumphant smile touching her lips, because for the first time in my life, I've found a man who is strong enough to let me be exactly that. My independence wasn't a badge of honor, Andre. It was a prison you helped build, and I've officially checked out. Andre looked from Brenda to the silent, looming presence of Junyoung. He saw the way Junyoung's hand stayed firmly on her back, not as a shackle, but as a support. He saw that he couldn't manipulate her anymore, because she wasn't alone. You've changed, Andre hissed, realizing the well had run dry. I've rested, Brenda corrected. There's a difference. Junyoung stepped forward then, just an inch. Mr. Han will escort you to the gates. If you contact Miss Owens again, you will find that my fondness for her translates into a very efficient legal and security apparatus. Do not test the limits of my patience. As Andre was led away, Brenda felt a massive tectonic shift in her chest. The ghost was gone. The guilt was gone. She turned in Junyoung's arms, leaning her forehead against his chest. I could have handled that, she whispered. I know you could have, Junyoung said, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her into the full safety of his embrace. But you didn't have to do it by yourself. That is the point, Brenda. You have a partner now. You are the queen, but even a queen has a guard. Brenda closed her eyes and listened to his heartbeat, a steady, rhythmic promise that she would never have to be the pillar for a man who didn't deserve to stand in her shadow ever again. The suitcase sat on the bed like an open mouth, waiting to swallow the woman Brenda had become in Seoul and return her to the woman she had been in Atlanta. Brenda folded a silk blouse with the practiced robotic precision of a woman who had been packing for battle her entire life. Her contract with Hangguang Tech was officially fulfilled. The fixer had done her job. The hostile takeover had been neutralized, the internal rot had been excised, and the company's stock was at an all-time high. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt a hollow, aching dread. Her phone was already buzzing with new alerts. A firm in London needed her. Her brother was texting about a new opportunity. A non-profit board in D.C. was begging for her to chair their crisis committee. The world was calling its pillar back. You pack like a soldier preparing for a retreat, a voice said from the doorway. Brenda didn't look up. She couldn't. If she saw Junyoung's face, the fragile glass of her composure would shatter. I'm not retreating, Junyoung. I'm returning to my life. My work is done here. Your work for Hangguang is done, Junyoung said, walking into the room. He didn't stop her hands. He simply stood on the other side of the suitcase, watching her. But I do not think your heart is finished. My heart doesn't pay the bills, she said, her voice tight. My heart doesn't keep my family safe. I have a life built on being the one who shows up. People are waiting for me, Junyoung. They need the strong Brenda back. And who is waiting for the Brenda who sleeps through the night? He asked softly. Who is waiting for the Brenda who wears slippers and drinks water and lets the world spin without her? Brenda finally looked up. There is no place for that woman in my world. I don't have a sanctuary in Atlanta. I have a post. I have a duty. Junyoung reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a single, thick vellum folder. He didn't hand it to her. He laid it across her neatly folded clothes, right in the center of the suitcase. Then we will build one, he said. Brenda frowned, looking at the gold embossed seal on the folder. What is this? A new contract? I told you I'm not. It is a charter, Junyoung interrupted, for a global foundation. I have called it the Sanctuary Fund. Brenda opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon. The endowment was staggering, enough to fund 100 lifetimes, but it was the mission statement that made her breath catch, to provide psychological, physical, and financial rest for the pillars of society, the caregivers, the community leaders, and the invisible workers who carry the weight of others. I realized something watching you, Junyoung said, stepping around the bed until he was inches from her. The world is full of people like us, Brenda. People who are so busy being the strong one that they have forgotten how to ask for help. They are the floors the world walks on. And eventually, floors crack. He took the silk blouse out of her hand and set it aside. I don't want you to be my consultant anymore. I want you to be my partner. I want us to run this together. We will build retreats in Seoul, in Georgia, in the Swiss Alps, places where people like you can go to be weak, for a month or a year, while we hold their world for them. I am offering you a legacy, he corrected, and I'm offering you a home. I have already bought the land for the first site in Atlanta. It's a forest, Brenda. Quiet, no boardrooms, just trees. He reached out, his hand cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking the hair at her temple. I spent 50 years being a CEO. You spent 50 years being a fixer. Let's spend the rest of our lives being the sanctuary. Stay with me, not because I need you to save my company, but because I want to be the man who makes sure you never have to pack a war bag ever again. Brenda looked at the suitcase. It represented 50 years of being everyone's answer. Then she looked at Junyoung. He represented the first time she had ever been the question. Who holds me? She had asked in the rain. The answer was standing right in front of her, holding a folder and a future. I don't know how to do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how to not be the one in charge. Good, Junyoung smiled, a rare, beautiful expression that reached his eyes. Neither do I. We can learn together. Brenda slowly, deliberately, reached down and closed the suitcase, but she didn't zip it. She pushed it off the bed, letting it hit the floor with a dull thud. The trees, she said, her eyes searching his. Are there really no boardrooms? Only gardens, he promised, and me. Brenda stepped into his arms, letting her head rest against his chest. For the first time, she didn't feel like a pillar. She felt like a woman who had finally come home. The air in the Georgia forest was different from the air in Seoul. It didn't smell of ozone or ambition. It smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and the sweet, heavy scent of blooming jasmine. A year had passed since the suitcase had hit the floor in the Hangguang Executive Suite. Brenda sat in a wide, hand-carved wooden swing on the porch of the first sanctuary retreat. She was dressed in a flowy, terracotta-colored linen set, her feet bare, her toes wiggling against the cool, shaded wood. Beside her, a small stone table held a glass of iced hibiscus tea and a book she had been reading for pleasure. Not for strategy, not for legal research, but for the sheer, quiet joy of a story that wasn't hers to fix. The silence was broken by a sharp, electronic chirp. Her phone, sitting on the edge of the table, vibrated with a persistent, familiar urgency. The screen lit up. Incoming call. E. Marcus. Brenda looked at the name. A year ago, that vibration would have triggered a Pavlovian response. A tightening of the jaw, a spike in her blood pressure, and a mental scan of her bank accounts. Marcus, her brother, was the king of minor crises that felt like the end of the world. She watched the phone dance across the stone. She could hear the old voice in her head. He needs you. You're the only one who can handle this. If you don't pick up, the house might fall down. But the pillar was gone. In its place was a woman who had learned the sacred power of no. Brenda didn't reach for the phone. She didn't even tense her shoulders. She simply looked at the device with a calm, detached curiosity, as if it were a strange relic from a past life. Is the world ending again? The voice was a low, warm rumble. Junyoung stepped out from the tall glass doors of the house. He had shed the billion-dollar suits for a simple navy polo and khakis. He looked younger, the harsh lines around his mouth softened by a year of regular sleep and deep laughter. He sat on the edge of the swing next to her, the wood creaking a welcome. He glanced at the vibrating phone, then back at Brenda. It's Marcus, Brenda said, her voice steady and melodic. He says it's an emergency. Something about a plumbing bill and a missed payment. Junyoung didn't offer to pay it. He didn't offer to call his fixers. He did something much more powerful. He reached out and slid his hand over hers, lacing his fingers through hers and pressing her palm flat against the arm of the swing. He anchored her to the present. The plumbing will still be broken tomorrow, Junyoung said softly, and Marcus is a 50-year-old man who can call a repairman himself. Brenda looked at their joined hands. She felt the warmth of his skin, the solid reality of his presence. She realized she wasn't waiting for the blow anymore. She wasn't bracing for the impact. She picked up the phone, her thumb sliding across the screen, not to answer, but to power it down. The screen went black. The vibration stopped. The forest reclaimed its silence. Brenda let out a long, slow breath. It wasn't the jagged, broken exhale she had released in the rain a year ago. This was different. It was the sound of a heavy door finally closing and a lock clicking into place. You did it, Junyoung whispered, leaning over to kiss her temple. I did, she breathed. I'm not the floor today, Junyoung. No, he said, pulling her closer so her head rested in the familiar sanctuary of his shoulder. Today, You are the guest, and the guest is meant to rest. The sun was high now, bathing the porch in a golden, drowsy warmth. Brenda felt the rhythmic pull of the swing, the steady heartbeat of the man beside her, and the weightless freedom of a woman who had finally finished her shift. She didn't think about the bills, the mergers, or the people who needed her to be strong. She didn't think about the fixer or the pillar. Brenda Owens, the woman who had carried the world on her back until her bones sang with the strain, slowly let her chin drop toward his chest. She closed her eyes, felt the sun on her skin, and for the first time in her life, she fell asleep. Not out of exhaustion, but out of peace. She was finally beautifully held. The end. Thank you for watching. If you love this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional twists and character-driven plots. And if you're ready for the next story, make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep believing in love that defies all odds.